All right. Good morning. Good to see you. Do we have any other announcements other than what's on the announcement sheet? Things that we don't know about? Of course, there's a lot of things I don't know about. Let me rephrase that. There's a lot of things I don't know about. But we're glad that you're here. And we have some that listen on telephone, and we're glad that I just got to think about that the other day. I don't mention them. I should. We're thankful that they are listening and hope that you've had a great week. If you turn your Bibles to Genesis, the 4th chapter, we'll be studying. Actually, we want to study the 4th and 5th chapter today. And I guess to be the old saying, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. I think that's the saying. If it's not, change it around. Fix it the way it's supposed to be. We'll try to study Genesis 6, 7, and 8 next week, the flood, and that'll kind of encompass all of that. And so we're not going to just spend a week per chapter because that'd take us a year to get out of this great book. But this is a book of firsts, and we have the first religious debate, the first religious dispute here this morning that we know of. And that's something we ought to always say. We don't know exactly everything that happened, but the things that we have, this is the first. It's the story of Cain and Abel. It's a sad story in many ways. We know it well, and so we'll not be laboring the point, but we do want to make some points from it. And verses 1 and 2 tell us, of course, of the birth of Cain and Abel. It says that Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. The word Cain means acquire. Matter of fact, it even says it in verse 1, I have acquired a man from the Lord. I've received. So Cain's the idea of receiving or acquiring. And she bore a brother to Cain. His name is Abel. His name means breath or vapor. You might say, well, how does that fit Abel? Well, his life's cut short. I guess you could say that. But Abel, it tells us, is the keeper of sheep. Cain's the tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground of the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected, Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Let's see the obvious, but also let's see the things that are not so obvious in this story. The story of Cain and Abel kind of went over it when we studied it here on Wednesday night. We studied Hebrews 11. We talked about Abel was able to offer more excellent sacrifice than Cain. And we look at the story, though, in Genesis 4, we see Cain and Abel, two brothers. Exactly when this happened, we don't know. Matter of fact, it even says in the process of time. Sometime, as time went on, they offered sacrifices. Did they offer them the same day? Who knows? You can read it one day and say, I believe they offered it the same day. And you can read it another day and you can say, I believe they offered it on different days. Okay. That's really not the point. When you look at it, you say, well, I know why Abel's sacrifice was accepted by God and Cain's was not. It's very simple. Cain brought of the ground, and Abel brought of the firstborn of the flock. And thus Cain violated the law of God. But wait a minute. That law had not been established. That covenant, that law that God had made or will make with the children of Israel was not made at the time of Cain and Abel. In other words, we don't know exactly what they were to bring as an offering to God, or if God had stipulated that an offering must be made. You see, we're not, time-wise, we're not there yet. We're not to the point where God told them to bring an animal sacrifice and the priest will offer. We're not there yet. So don't bind that conclusion upon why Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's was not. Now, you might say, well, then we're going to have to suppose some things. Well, yes and no. First of all, if we go back to Hebrews chapter 11, we see there that Abel's sacrifice was accepted. But if you look with me in Hebrews chapter 11. Let me get there. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, it says, by faith, Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. But notice how he begins. By faith, Abel. In other words, whatever God had told him to bring from a standpoint of a sacrifice, Abel did it by faith. Cain evidently didn't. Now, we could suppose, and I think you can suppose this, and you might be right, and you might not be right. I might be right, and I might not be right on this. But if you notice, it just says that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground. But in verse 4, it says with regards to Abel's sacrifice, it was the firstborn. It was the best. The firstborn was always considered the best. Now, I don't let my sister know that because she's older than I. So we don't tell her, oh, you're the best. But in God's sight, remember, when you get to the law that was given in the book of Leviticus, you brought the first fruits. Why? Because they were considered the best. You brought the first of the flock. Why? Because they were considered the best. So it could have been that. But I still think what it probably was is you get back to Hebrews 11. By faith, Abel offered more excellent sacrifice than Cain. But notice, if you will, you have brothers, you have sacrifices, you have one being accepted by God, one not being. And so Cain, notice the reaction. Cain got angry. And it says that his countenance fell. Cain got mad. Pretty normal reaction, isn't it? You do something, you get mad, right? You do something that's wrong, you get mad. You take a hammer and a nail and you're beating that nail and your hand's in the way and you miss and you hit your thumb and you get mad. You get mad at yourself, right? Well, that was stupid. I should have moved the thing. And you get mad. When we get mad when people say things against us. We get mad when people do things against us. We just grow upset. We grow mad. That's just a normal, typical reaction. Jesus grew angry, right? When did Jesus grow angry? Money changer. We went in and folks were trying to profit, with lack of a better term, trying to profit out of the worship of the time. And so Jesus grew angry. Paul realized that anger would happen. In Ephesians chapter 4, remember he says, be angry and sin not. Now, think about that. He doesn't say, don't be angry. Paul allows for the idea of anger being a part of our life. But notice what he says, be angry and sin not. Okay, so it's all right to be angry. Depends on what your anger is at, of course. But in that anger, don't sin. Cain's angry. He's angry enough that his countenance is fallen. Now, God knows what's going on, and God knows Cain's heart. He knows Abel's heart, and he knows what's going on. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is toward you, but you should rule over it. Now there's what we want to see. The Lord asks a simple question. Why are you angry? Do you ever ask questions of people and you even know the answer is obvious? But you ask it. Do you know why you ask it? You ask it to get these folks to do what? To stop and to think, right? Just let them consider what they're doing, what's going on. Let them do a little self-inspection. And so, God asked this question. He says, what's the matter? Why are you angry? Here's what a lot of us would say, oh, poor baby, what's the problem? That's not the way God asked it, or according to what we have recorded here. But God says, why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? And then he goes on, if you will, to sort of answer his own question with another question. He says, if you do well, won't you be accepted? Makes sense, doesn't it? If you do what's right, if you had done what's right, your sacrifice would have been accepted. So there was something, we don't know what, but there was something in his sacrifice that was not acceptable to God. Now, like I said, we can assume that he just brought of the fruit of the ground. Or we can assume that, it was because it was the fruit of the ground. We don't know. But it's not acceptable. Yeah, Ken.
I get from this. It's being more acceptable, maybe Abel had put some thought in what the Lord might want.
Sure.
This crowd, whatever was on the shelf.
Yeah. Yeah, because you do have the first fruits, the first versus just seems like whatever was available, whatever was there. And it does to me, yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that it was just a matter of convenience versus a matter of thinking about it and giving it some thought and consideration. Absolutely. No, I think my own personal belief is that God had evidently made a covenant with them and told them what to do, and we just don't have that covenant. In other words, we think of covenants, we think of the Old Testament, New Testament, and that's right. That's all we have. But evidently, Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve had a covenant that God had made with them, but God did not preserve that covenant for us to have today. And whatever it was, Cain didn't do what was right by it. Yeah. Anything else? Good question. Good comment. Yeah. 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 Inspiration did not, in my opinion, we could trace this really, did not allow perfection in the individual. If that's the case, then, and then, as you say, and that he seemed to have known, the Hebrew writer seemed to know the covenant, it had to be something that was passed down, which, they didn't have TV, so they passed things down, and the Jews would have. And it's an interesting point, and I don't know that, yeah.
So that we can make that judgment.
Very good question. And my answer would be because God in his providence did not see that it was necessary for us to have. Um, well, there was all kinds of writings that were not preserved. Because when you really get to the Bible and a study of the history of the Bible, and you ask yourself, how did we get the Bible? One of the ingredients in getting the Bible, I believe, was the providence of God. And the providence of God, not just from the standpoint of saying, well, I'm going to get it through time, here it is, but here's what you need to know and here's what you don't need to know. That's my take on it. I'm not saying I'm right, but that's my take on it. It's a good point. It's an excellent point. Anything else? It's all good. It's excellent. Excellent. And so we get back to, let's see. Well, I want to look at the last part of verse 7. He says, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you or toward you, but you should rule over it. There's the lesson for us. To learn to master your domain. Learn to master yourself. I was listening this morning as I was getting ready. I was listening to a preacher friend of mine. He preaches. It's a fairly new congregation. It's called 109 Church of Christ. It's out of Mount Juliet. It's a church plant. The Mount Juliet Church had a church plant in 2019 out there. Wayne is, I think Wayne's around 64, 65. He's preaching out there now. He's their preacher. But he was making a point. He was talking about sin, and he was talking about the fact that as Christians, we need to have an understanding that we abstain from sin. And he made the point, was making the point, to kind of paraphrase and summarize, the fact that while we abstain from sin, the best way to abstain from sin is to never get involved with it, never start, and don't participate. And how that we can become numb to sin and numb to temptation. And it's an excellent point. Well, it fits right in with what is being said here. And that's the fact, learn to master yourself. Learn to master your area so that you stay away from temptation. Cain evidently didn't. And so Cain, look at verse 8, talked with his brother. Well, that would be an interesting conversation, wouldn't it? Now, I don't know what was said, but it said that he talked to his brother. It came to pass that when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and he killed him. His deeds were evil. His brother's deeds, Abel's deeds, were righteous. Cain had gotten so angry, and you know, that's, you ask yourself, why is there so much gun violence in the United States of America today? You know, that's a problem. But maybe we need to ask ourselves, why is there so much anger that's leading to a lot of the gun violence? And so maybe we're not looking at the root cause of the problem. Now you can, talk about gun rights and all this stuff, and that's not my argument. My argument is where the problem really lies. It lies within the individual. But why are we so angry? And why do we hate so much? Why do we hate each other so much? There was a gentleman that stopped Wednesday night at the end of services. Some of you probably walked past him, probably spoke to him as you walked out. He walked in. He really came for services, or that's what he said. He came for services, and he didn't realize we started at 6:30. And he works, and he was just getting off, and he said just for whatever reason he felt compelled to come in here and speak. He asked me, he wanted to talk to me, so he asked me, his number one question was, what was the lesson on tonight? Well, if you were in my class, you know it was James 2 and prejudice. So I just said, prejudice? His eyebrow shot up. He said, well, that'd be an interesting subject. I said, well, it was. Sorry you missed it. We do have to ask ourselves, and prejudice is the idea of prejudging individuals based upon appearance or where they come from. There are particular, we didn't talk about this one tonight, but you say, where'd you come from? And they'll tell you, and there's always a joke in Dixon County. Of course, we lived there for so many years, but if people say, well, I came from, and I'll just tell you, because you have to understand, they would say, well, if I come from Hickman County, they'd say, yep, know why you acted that way. There was a stigma, a prejudge, a prejudice towards the folks from Hickman County. And they were no worse and no better than folks from Dixon County. But we have this stigma towards everybody. Why? Well, I don't know. But in many ways, at least my way of thinking, you kind of see the first fruits of it right here. There's a prejudice. He's mad at his brother. He's prejudiced towards his brother. Why? Because his brother did something evidently right, and what he did was not right. And so he compounded the problem by killing his brother. Anything else? That's a good point. That's a good point. Yes, it was. It was out of envy, it was out of jealousy, and it was premeditated. Absolutely, I agree. And so in verse 9, the Lord said to Cain, where's Abel your brother? And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Now that's a question. Leroy Brownlow, years and years ago, I want to say back in probably early 60s. I started to say 50s, but probably early 60s. Brother Brownlow, preacher in what we call Church of Christ, wrote a book, Questions of the Bible. You may have studied it in years past. And he had a section of Old Testament questions, and he had a section of New Testament questions. And what he did is he had preached sermons on questions out of the Bible. And a lot of folks studied it. A lot of folks studied it for Bible classes. I know in the early 80s, I had a preacher that he was basically retired. He was still preaching at a place. And he called me up, and he was going to be on vacation one Sunday. And he said, Paul, can you come and preach for me? I was in college at the time. I said, sure. He said, okay. And he says, we're studying out of Brother Brownlow's book, and I happen to have a copy of it. He said, he told me what page it was on. And I said, okay. He didn't tell me the topic. A little later on in Genesis, we're going to find a question. It's this simple question. How old art thou? The old King James says. I go into his class not knowing, because I had always been out in the auditorium. I go in his class. I'm 20, maybe 21. I'm 20 or 21. And I go into his class, and they're all my parents' age and older. And I'm teaching a lesson on how old you are. But Brother Brownlow did a lesson on this. Am I my brother's keeper? That's a great question. And the answer is yes. We are. We are. My wife, and I love her to death, has propensity for laying stuff down and then not remembering where she laid it. And so for about the first 10, 15 years of our marriage, every once in a while, I'd get this question. Where's my so-and-so? And I would help her look for it. Till one day, she said, where's my so-and-so? And I said, I don't know. It's not mine. I have no clue where you laid it. You need to find it. And she did. And I wasn't being ugly. I was busy at the time. And so I don't get that much anymore. Thank you. I don't get that much anymore. But every once in a while you'll hear her say, I can't find my, she says it differently now. I can't find my so-and-so. And so we start the search. It's where you last laid it. Do you remember where you last? I don't remember. I wouldn't have asked you. Yes, ma'am. I got that. We have that propensity for trying to lay blame, not necessarily on us or blame, but just, try to remain neutral. And I think to a degree, Cain is just trying to say, well, cover up his tracks. He's committed this murder. He's killed his brother Abel. Lord, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are. Now, that then means that we too are our brother's keepers. And we are. Excuse me. As a society, we should learn that we are our brother's keepers. We really are. When you really think about it, we really are dependent upon one another. Suzanne and I got up yesterday morning and made the trek to West Tennessee. So you know where we were and why we were there. So I forewarn you, don't go near Suzanne. She's got pictures. And so but we went to see our grandbaby, and our son and daughter-in-law just happened to be there. But we drove down the interstate. We drove 70 miles an hour. We hit the interstate right out here and drove all the way down and then turned off and so forth and so on. Came back last evening, driving down the interstate. There were some that drove quite a bit faster than we drove. There were very few that drove a little bit slower than what we were driving. There were some that were driving the same speed, and so I either had to speed up or slow down to get out of their way or for them to get out of my way. Now, I say all that to say this. I was dependent upon them driving safely. And that's why we have laws, land, in order to kind of keep chaos regulated. Now, we can go too far with laws, but let's don't go there. But we depend upon each other. I was dependent upon that guy as he was passing me, stay in his lane. That's why we have markers. That's why we have lanes. You stay in your lane. I will stay in my lane. Why we have rules to keep us safe from the standpoint of our own property. You don't come on mine. I won't come on yours. That kind of thing. We're dependent upon folks. Economy is dependent upon folks. If one of the stores, if folks continue to loot it, and yet it continues to stay open, do you know what's going to happen to the price of goods there? They're going to go up, right? Why? Because their profit margin is not what it should be. It's going to go up. Everything is interconnected. People, we are interconnected. Economy is interconnected. Everything's interconnected. And so we have to realize we are our brother's keepers. We really are dependent upon others. Now, in the church, that is very much so. We are family. The Bible talks about forgive one another, love one another, serve one another, use hospitality one towards another. All these one another passages to show us that we are a brotherhood. We are a family. We're a family that needs to get along. Well, not always. Why? Because we don't all have the same worldview. We don't all have the same background and see everything through the same prism or perspective. But we're family. And Cain is basically taught that here. Yeah, you are your brother's keeper. Anything else? Well, look what God says. What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And when you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. So because of Cain's sin, there's a curse. He's a fugitive. He's a vagabond. There's agricultural failure. In other words, the ground's going to bring forth, but it's going to be tough. We went through some beautiful ground in West Tennessee We think West Tennessee is beautiful. I realize if you're just from Middle Tennessee, you may not think West Tennessee is beautiful, but we grew up in West Tennessee, Suzanne and I did, to go and drive through as we did some of the fields and to see the soybeans and some of the other things that the cotton that still hadn't been picked yet, and to see those beautiful things, just eye-opening, just beautiful. But yet the hard work that the farmer has to put in. And anyway, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment. The word punishment there means my iniquity. My iniquity, my sin is greater than I can bear. The consequences of what I've done is greater than what I'm able to live through. Now, is that always true? Lord's always there, isn't he? It really depends on how you want to walk or conduct your life, how you want to walk through this life. He says, my punishment's greater than I can bear. Surely you've driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I'll be a fugitive and vagabond upon the earth, and it'll happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. And the Lord then, according to verse 15, puts a mark upon Cain. Now you're going to ask me what that mark was. I have no idea. Did he look funny? Could have. Did he have a mark that was visible? Some sort of birthmark or other mark? I don't know. The mark itself did not remove the stain of the sin. It just protected Cain, and no one could take his life. Remember in the Old Testament times, now granted, this is what I'm fixing to say, this was after, say, this time, but you had what was called a Kinsmen Redeemer. You know, and he was the guy that basically, if somebody murdered somebody in your family, the Kinsman Redeemer went out and basically killed you. Eye for an eye sort of way of doing things. And so if you think about it, if that principle existed in the days of Cain and Abel, granted, it would have been a family member, right? Because they had come from the brothers and sisters. But there would have been someone to come and take Cain's life because he had taken Abel's life. Cain says, don't want this. So God puts a mark of some kind upon Cain, and he's spared from being killed by basically another family member. Anything else?
There must have been litany of things in Cain's life that led up to this.
Yeah.
I can't imagine him getting so mad over
Right.
that he would kill his brother.
Yeah.
So I'm just guessing that there have been lots of heartache, there are lots of disagreements,
Yeah.
and probably very few peaceful discussions.
Right. Yeah.
That led up to this.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I don't think that these fellows weren't probably as good, thick brothers as we would like for them to have been. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, jealousy, envy, just a lot of things. Yeah, and I appreciate something I think you implied, at least in what you said, conversations. We don't really have, it just seems like he went one time. I think there were probably more than just the one conversation. There was time spent. And this anger seethed within him and just kept working till it worked out. And so.
And we see that today.
Oh, yeah.
We see that in every walk of life. I look at balance sheets. That if you look at them, there are so many.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with numbers. It has nothing to do with profit. It has everything.
Yeah.
And there's no proven way
Yeah.
Church is the same way.
Yeah.
When you have individuals in the church who are just determined that this needs to be done this way without consideration of the entire group,
Yes.
find that very same problem.
Yes.
Not intentionally, in my opinion.
Yeah. We all think we're right, and we don't set out to disprove our. That's what she tells you too. We don't set out necessarily to prove anyone wrong when we do stuff. We do it because we think we're right, and we may be very far from right. Yeah, I've seen that too in the church a lot.
Social aspects of life, the political aspects of life, and the spiritual aspects of life. It's almost as though there are four sets of rules when there's only one.
Right.
And we ignore that.
Yep.
And think, well, I'm not in church. I don't have to do this.
Right.
I'm not in a particular business. I don't have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How many times in the book of Proverbs do we hear the value of wisdom, knowledge, and righteousness? And then the opposite is true.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When you were talking, it reminded me of a story when, of course, Suzanne and I raised our CPA now, but our CPA that we had before, Ethan, was a lady, and we've had two men CPAs and two lady CPAs in our existence, but as a family. But the last one that we had before Ethan, we had her for many years. And I sat down and talked with her one day, and at that conversation, she was filling out my taxes, and I told her what I had told the other two previous ones, and it's what I tell Ethan all the time. I want everything that the government will allow me to have, but I want it honestly. I don't want it crookedly. I don't want to have to finagle numbers to get it. I want it, I want what they're going to allow me, but I don't want to cheat. I want to be honest. And I remember, like I say, in talking to her, she called me Brother Daltrey, okay? Brother Daltrey. She said, I thank you for that. I appreciate that, but you would be surprised, because she did quite a few preachers. She said, you'd be surprised how many preachers don't have that same belief. And I said, really? She said, oh, I get told all the time. And I said, well, you're going to do it honestly and fairly and upright, or I said, I can go somewhere else. And she always did mine honestly and fairly, except for 1 year, and I caught it, and we had to do an amendment, but it was just purely a mistake. And ended up owing money, didn't it? Yeah, that one was. It took a little paperwork, but she did it, and she just didn't carry the one. Yep, that's right. Yeah. 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 Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's so true, and it is true in the business world. Mm.
But I think it came in April.
Absolutely.
CBA.
Yeah, every quarter I call Ethan up and I say, I don't like you today, son.
This guy hears that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Hmm. Yeah, self-control. You must fight it. You got to fight it, and it's a fight, really, isn't it? To live the Christian life, it's a fight. That's right. And you might say, well, some might say, well, don't look at it that way. Well, I realize I do look at things weirdly. My son, I told him one day when he was in college, I said, I always looked at college as a challenge. And I said, I always looked at tests as a challenge. I said, I looked at it as a challenge to see if I could give back to the teacher exactly what he or she has given to me. And the challenge is to basically beat them at the game. And so study hard. And he said, you're really weird. And so I said, yeah, I know it. I did. I looked at every test as a challenge to see how much I could give them back. And we did all right. We got out of there. I walked through the stage and they said, Lordy, Lordy, get out of here. So I did. But anyway, you have verse 16, family of Cain talked about. You have Lamech talked about his family there in verse 19. Then you have what's called Lamech's sword song. And he talked about Ada and Zillah. Hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hunting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. It seems as if there's a propensity for violence in this. There's not really a lot to add to it. It's that there seems to be retribution there. I want us to move over very quickly because there's really not a lot in chapter 5. But I want you to notice that it begins, this is the book of genealogy of Adam. And then you have verse 6 following, you have the family of Seth mentioned, and you have the lineage there. Now, you could look at this and you can say, okay, I can figure out that from the time of Adam to the time of the flood was a little over 1,500 years, about 1,600 years. And that might be correct and that might not be correct. It depends on who you want to talk to amongst religious scholars. Sometimes genealogies, they went accurately, one right after the next. Sometimes they skipped, not on purpose, but they, in telling about great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, they forgot about him in their lineage. And so there would be those in theological circles that would say, well, we can't really determine the age of the earth by Genesis 5. And there'd be others that say that we could. And so you take it, in my opinion, you take it as you want to take it. But I want you to notice something. I really want you to notice something. Look in verse 5. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Look in verse 8. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Verse 11. So all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. Verse 14. So all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. Verse 17. So all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died, and so forth and so on. You probably catch the same thing I catch. And he died. They lived a long time before the flood, and we'll talk about that a little bit next week. But each one of them, they did not get off of this earth. They did not get off of this island without passing away. And so death comes upon all of us. It's no respecter of persons. You can live a long time, but you're still going to pass away. And so we have to be prepared for that point and that time. But anyway, anything else? Adam lived 130 years. begat a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. Yes. 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 Very true. Anything else? Well, we thank you.
Chapter 4, when Seth is born, she gave him another son instead of Abel. Doesn't call back to the whole thing. Sounds to me like Abel might have been the favorite son for whatever reason, and therefore Cain felt second best.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
a lifelong.
Same problem that we're going to have with Joseph when we get to Joseph here. And so, yes. Would have been nice.
Well, yeah, that's what I think he did. He's ignored. That's what I got like.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of puts some time limit on a few things right there.
Yeah. 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 By the way, if you're just interested, you may not be interested. But if you want to say, all right, preacher, how old do you believe the earth is? The earth is probably, in my estimation, in all of my readings, 10,000 years old or younger, not older. But you may not agree with that, and that's fine, because the Lord really didn't set out to show us how old it is. And so, I'm not going to fight you over it. I don't believe in evolution, and I don't believe in billions of years of the world, and I don't think you can prove it. I think you have to live by more faith than I have to live by to believe all that myself. Anything else? Let's bow right quick. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day, for the many blessings of it. Thankful that you love us and that you watch over us. Thankful for sending your Son to die upon the cross for us so that we have the hope of heaven that we have. We also ask that you be with us, that we truly may be masters of our domain, and that we may be individuals that are able to control ourselves and our temperament, that we may learn to love one another and be truly one another's keeper. Watch over us, bless us, and keep us. Forgive us of our sins, for this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Thank y'all. Y'all have a great week.